There's a specific kind of irritation that comes from stepping on a piece of Lego barefoot in the middle of the night. A sharp, soul-piercing pain that makes you reevaluate all your life choices, including the decision to ever buy Legos in the first place. Now, take that feeling, stretch it out over a few weeks, and replace the Lego with a growing suspicion that your wife is up to something. That was my reality. Now, before you think this is one of those dramatic, self-pitying tales where I claim I was the perfect husband and she was a monster, relax. I'm no saint. I leave my socks in places they shouldn't be. I never mastered the art of loading a dishwasher correctly, and I have a complicated relationship with assembling furniture. But if marriage was graded on a curve, I was doing just fine. Helen, on the other hand, lately, she'd been acting like a politician during a scandal. Evasive, overly friendly, and suspiciously busy. And not the, I'm busy doing something productive kind of busy. The, I'm busy making sure you don't look too closely at what I'm actually doing kind. For the last month, my marriage had taken on the ambience of a mildly tense corporate meeting. Conversations had become mostly logistical. Did you pick up the dry cleaning? What time is the Smith's barbecue? We're out of coffee again. And sure, marriages go through phases, but this felt different. But I kept my cool. No accusations, no snooping. Just a patient, observant man waiting for the universe to do what it always does, serve up the truth in the most ridiculous way possible. That day, I was at home fixing the kitchen drawer, which had apparently declared independence from the rest of the cabinet. If there was a war between me and home maintenance, I was losing spectacularly. Somewhere between trying to shove the drawer back in place and wondering if it was possible to live without it entirely, the doorbell rang. I considered ignoring it. Anyone who truly needed to reach me knew a text would suffice, but curiosity won. I opened the door and was immediately greeted by a man who looked like he had walked straight out of a soap opera. Perfect hair, a confident smile, and a posture that screamed, "I know exactly what I'm doing here." "Jerry," he asked, as if confirming I was indeed the main character in whatever scene he had planned. "That's what my birth certificate says," I replied. "And you are?" He gave a small chuckle, like we were about to share a moment that I would find amusing. "I'm Alan." Well, that cleared up absolutely nothing. "Okay, Alan. And what brings you to my porch on this fine day?" Alan glanced over his shoulder, almost as if making sure there was no one else around. Then he turned back to me, that knowing smirk still in place. "Listen, I know this might be a little awkward. A phrase no man wants to hear from a stranger standing at his doorstep. But I figured it was only fair that you knew." I crossed my arms, half out of irritation, half because I still had sawdust on my hands from my failed drawer project. "Knew what?" He sighed. The kind of sigh people give when they're about to reveal something they expect will change the course of someone's life. And, well, he wasn't wrong. I've been seeing Helen. Now, let's pause for a second. This is the part where most people would describe their hearts sinking, their vision blurring, their knees going weak. Maybe even some dramatic inner monologue about how they should have seen it coming. But me? I just stared at him. Then, after a beat, I laughed. It wasn't a polite chuckle. No, this was a full-bodied, genuinely amused laugh. The kind that makes your stomach hurt. Alan, bless him, looked confused. I didn't think you'd take it like that." "Buddy," I said, wiping an imaginary tear from my eye. "You came all the way here, in broad daylight, to tell me you've been seeing my wife? And you thought what? That I'd shake your hand? Offer you a congratulatory beer?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I just thought you deserved the truth." "Oh, the generosity. What a kind and noble gentleman." I took a deep breath, still smiling. "Let me get this straight. You, a man I have never met, decided to pop by and inform me that my wife has been unfaithful. Out of what? A sense of honor?" Alan hesitated. Well, sort of." I nodded, as if this all made perfect sense. "And tell me, Alan, what exactly do you expect to happen next? Do I punch you? Cry? Thank you for your service?" To his credit, Alan looked increasingly uncertain about the brilliance of his plan. "I just thought you should know." "Well, Alan, I do now," I said cheerfully. "So, mission accomplished. You can go ahead and take your dramatic pause somewhere else." Alan opened his mouth, then closed it, apparently deciding he had used up all his courage for the day. With an awkward nod, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the street like a man who had just realized that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't his best idea. I shut the door, let out a long exhale, and leaned against the wall. Well, that was something. There are a lot of ways to find out your wife is cheating. Some people notice unexplained absences. Others find receipts or texts that don't add up. Me? I got a personal visit from the man himself. And oddly enough, I wasn't even mad. Not yet, anyway. Because if Helen thought she could play house while sneaking around with a guy named Alan, she had seriously underestimated just how much I could make this situation a whole lot more interesting. And oh, I planned to. Alan, the home-wrecking messenger of the hour, had barely turned the corner when I grabbed my phone and did something that surprised even me. I called Helen. I wasn't sure why exactly. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe I just wanted to see how she sounded. Or maybe, deep down, I wanted to give her the same opportunity Alan had given me, to lie directly to my face. She picked up on the third ring. "Hey," she said, her voice smooth, casual. "What's up?" "Oh, nothing much, dear. Just had an interesting chat with a man who claims he's been making use of our marital benefits. How about you?" But I didn't say that. Instead, I said, "Where are you?" She hesitated. A split second, just barely noticeable, but it was there. "At the office," she said. "Late meeting." Now, this was fascinating for two reasons. One, Helen didn't have late meetings. She had a job that involved a lot of creative decisions, a lot of emails, and a lot of meetings that absolutely could have been emails. But late meetings? No, that wasn't in the schedule. And two, well, Alan had just left my house. "Oh yeah," I said, keeping my tone light. "Big project." "Yeah, something last minute. A lot of moving parts." I smiled. "Sounds important. Hope you're getting paid overtime." She exhaled, the kind of exhale someone does when they want you to stop asking questions. "Listen, I'll be home in an hour or so, okay? We can talk then." "Talk? Right. Sure," I said. "See you soon." I hung up, dropped my phone onto the kitchen counter, and took a moment to appreciate the sheer artistry of what was happening. My wife had just lied to me, effortlessly, over the phone, while standing, where? In Alan's car? On the street around the corner? Was she watching his car pull away while spinning some fake work crisis? It was honestly impressive. And if she could pull that off without breaking a sweat, I had to wonder just how long she'd been practicing. I wasn't going to wait an hour. I wasn't going to sit around like a fool, pretending I didn't already have confirmation of what was going on. Instead, I grabbed my keys, got into my truck, and made the 5-minute drive to Helen's office. Now, let me clarify, I wasn't sneaking. I wasn't hiding behind bushes or pressing my back against walls like some rejected action movie star. No, I walked right into that office building like a man who had just learned that his marriage was a lot more collaborative than he had previously believed. The place was mostly empty. The receptionist had already packed up and gone, and only a handful of desks were still occupied by people who clearly hated their lives. Helen's office was at the far end, her name on a frosted glass door that, up until today, I had never had a reason to question. I knocked. A shuffle of movement. Then the sound of someone clearing their throat. "Come in," she called. I pushed the door open. Helen was at her desk, looking far too composed for someone who had supposedly been caught in the throes of a last-minute work emergency. No papers scattered, no open laptop filled with frantic emails. Just her, sitting there, like she hadn't been expecting anyone. She blinked when she saw me. "Jerry, hey babe." I gave her a smile. "Just thought I'd stop by. You know, see how things are going with that big, important meeting." Her fingers twitched against the desk. "What?" "The late meeting," I said, gesturing vaguely around the room. "Must be a real game changer, considering you forgot to mention it before today." For a second, I thought she might try to keep up the act. She even glanced at her phone like she was considering fabricating a fake call right there in front of me. But then, something shifted. She sat back, crossed her arms, and did that thing she always did when she wanted to look like the smartest person in the room. "What's going on, Jerry?" I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "I had a visitor today." She tilted her head. "Who?" "Oh, just a guy. Nice hair, annoyingly confident. Walked right up to my door and introduced himself." I paused, said his name was Alan. And there it was. The flicker, the half-second of something flashing across her face before she smothered it. "Alan," she repeated. "Yeah, Alan." I drummed my fingers against my knee. "Real friendly guy? Told me he's been seeing my wife." Helen exhaled, and for the first time, I saw it. The internal calculations. The split-second decision of whether to keep lying or shift into damage control. Then she made a mistake. She laughed. Jerry, she said, shaking her head. Come on. You're not seriously believing some random guy who shows up at your door, are you? Random guy? I repeated. That's how you want to play this? Look, I don't know what Alan told you, but I held up a hand. No, no, don't ruin it. This is my favorite part. The part where you try to convince me that this is all some misunderstanding. That Alan just waltzed up to my house and, for no particular reason, decided to inform me about a torrid affair that doesn't actually exist. Helen's jaw tightened. I never said that. You didn't have to. A long pause. She glanced at the door, like she was mentally calculating the best way to exit this conversation. Here's the thing, Helen, I said, leaning back in the chair. I really don't care about Alan. I don't care about his hair, his confidence, or whatever questionable decisions led him to believe that showing up at my house was a good idea. What I do care about is the fact that my wife looked me in the face today and lied without hesitation. Silence. Then she said, What do you want me to say? I considered that. Oh, I don't know. Maybe start with the truth. Helen inhaled, long and slow. Okay, she said finally. Fine. But before she could say another word, the office door opened. And standing there, looking like he had just stepped into the world's worst sequel to a movie he hadn't wanted to be in, was Alan. And suddenly, things got a whole lot more interesting. Alan stood in the doorway like he had just realized this was not the rerun of life he had signed up for. His confident expression flickered, like a man who had walked into what he thought was a casual meeting and instead found himself on the stage of a high-stakes interrogation. Helen didn't turn around to look at him immediately. That was interesting. Instead, she sat there, frozen for half a second too long, like she was processing the worst possible outcome of this moment. Then she slowly exhaled and finally turned her head toward him. Alan, she said, her voice just a little too level. What are you doing here? Oh, good question. Let's see how Alan handles it. Alan blinked, mouth slightly open, clearly scrambling to pick a direction. He looked at me, then at Helen, then back at me. He should have stopped there. Walked out, vanished into the night, maybe even left town, started over somewhere new with a fake name and a fabricated backstory. But no, Alan was not a man with good decision-making skills. I wanted to talk to you, he said to Helen. Now, this was just fantastic. Helen rubbed her temple like she was about to develop the worst headache of her life. You shouldn't be here right now. Oh, I agree, I said, sitting back in my chair, enjoying the free entertainment. But since he is here, I say let's hear him out. Alan shifted on his feet. Listen, I didn't mean to cause problems. That made me laugh. You didn't mean to cause problems? Alan, buddy, you showed up to my house and dropped a bomb like you were delivering a package. Problems were the only thing you were going to cause. Helen shot him a glare. Why would you go to our house? Oh, our house, is it? How touching. Alan opened his mouth, closed it, decided to try again. I thought it was the right thing to do. Helen clenched her jaw. Well, it wasn't. I had to admire this. Her strategy wasn't to deny anything. No, she had skipped right to damage control, which meant she wasn't trying to convince me that Alan was lying, just that Alan was a moron. Which, to be fair, he absolutely was. I clapped my hands together. All right, let's do this then. Alan, since you seem so eager to communicate, tell me, how long has this little arrangement been going on? Helen shot me a warning glance, but I ignored her. Alan hesitated, glancing at her like a student checking with the teacher before answering a question in class. She didn't say anything, which was probably his worst-case scenario. So, after an excruciating pause, Alan did what I knew he would do. He cracked. A few months. I smiled. Few as in 2, or few as in long enough for Helen to have scheduled you into her calendar? Alan shifted again. I don't know exactly. It just happened. Sure it did, I said. Just like how I happened to stumble into a tax audit once. Totally random. Helen exhaled, then turned to Alan fully. You need to go. Oh no, I said, grinning. I think you should stay. We're finally getting somewhere. Alan looked like he wanted nothing more than to be swallowed by the floor. He was shifting toward the door already, which only made Helen more irritated. This isn't helping anything, she said, standing up now, arms crossed. You already know Jerry, so what is this? Some performance. I nodded. Oh, absolutely. And I'm having a great time. Helen sighed, glancing around the room like she was hoping for a sudden fire drill to get her out of this. Alan, meanwhile, took another cautious step toward the door. So, I continued, you're telling me that this, whatever this is, has been going on for months, and somehow, neither of you thought I'd notice? Alan looked helplessly at Helen, as if expecting her to jump in and defend him. She didn't. Instead, she turned back to me and squared her shoulders. Fine. You want the truth? You got it. Yes. It's been happening for a while. But it's not as simple as you think. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, I cannot wait to hear this explanation. Helen pressed her lips together, thinking for a moment, then said, I was going to tell you. Alan's head snapped toward her so fast I thought he might get whiplash. I tilted my head. Oh yeah? When? Before or after Alan here decided to play FedEx with my marriage? Helen didn't answer right away, which meant the answer was never. I stood up, stretching slightly, as if this was just another day, another minor inconvenience. Well, this has been fun, but I think we're done here. Helen frowned. That's it. What do you mean, that's it? I laughed. What were you expecting? Tears. A dramatic speech? I've got other things to do today, Helen. Alan made another small movement toward the door. Go, Helen muttered at him. Alan didn't hesitate this time. He slipped out so fast you'd think he was never there, which left just me and Helen. She looked at me, arms still crossed, jaw tight. So what now? I smiled. Now? Now I go home and have a beer. Maybe watch some TV. You, on the other hand? You've got some thinking to do. She narrowed her eyes. That's it. I grabbed my keys off her desk and walked to the door, then turned back for a moment. For now? But don't worry, Helen. I'll make sure this gets really interesting. And with that, I left her standing there, probably more confused than she had ever been in her life. Good. There's a special kind of moment in life when everything is so ridiculously clear that you almost have to laugh. Not because it's funny in the traditional sense, but because if you don't, you might actually start questioning how you ended up in a situation this stupid. For me, that moment was about 20 minutes after walking out of Helen's office, sitting in my truck, staring at my own steering wheel like it owed me an apology. I had been married for 8 years. 8 years of sharing a house, paying bills, making plans, all with a person who had apparently decided that some guy named Alan was worth risking everything over. And for what? What was the big selling point? His dazzling personality? His ability to stand awkwardly in doorways and regret his decisions in real time? I needed more. Not because I was unsure. I was well past the point of doubt. But because if I was going to do this right, I needed to make sure that Helen truly, deeply understood just how badly she had underestimated me. So I did what any reasonable man would do. I went home, poured myself a drink, and pulled up the joint bank account. Now, let me just say, marriage does a lot of things to a person. It makes you more patient, more tolerant. But above all, it teaches you things you never expected to know, like exactly how much your wife spends on nonsense every month. Helen had a habit, not of shopping. No, that would have been too predictable. Helen's addiction was services. Subscription boxes, personal coaching, yoga classes she never attended but kept paying for, an online masterclass in floral arrangement. She had not arranged a single flower in the time I'd known her. And my personal favorite, the overpriced hair salon that she insisted was the only place that gets it right. It was all right there, in the statements. Hundreds of dollars every month poured into things that had absolutely no impact on her actual life. It was almost inspiring in a way. And just like that, I had my plan. The first thing I did was make a few adjustments to our financial landscape. Nothing drastic, just some gentle reallocation. I moved half of our savings into a new, separate account under my name. Not hidden, not stolen, just relocated. Think of it as financial motivation for Helen to rethink some of her recent choices. Then, for the real fun, I canceled every single unnecessary expense. The subscription boxes? Gone. The masterclass? Say goodbye to floral expertise. The premium salon membership? Let's see how she does at a regular chain like the rest of us. And the best part? I didn't say a word about it. Now, I know what you're thinking. Jerry, isn't that a little passive-aggressive? And the answer is absolutely. But here's the thing. This wasn't about money. This was about control. Helen had spent months, maybe longer, making decisions behind my back, creating this whole separate reality where I was nothing more than a background character in her life. So now she was going to feel what it was like when someone else started making decisions without her input. And just as I was finishing up my little masterpiece of financial restructuring, the door opened. Helen walked in, dropping her bag on the counter like she always did, but something was different. She hesitated, looked at me. "You're home early," she said, like she wasn't sure whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. I took a sip of my drink and smiled. Yeah, thought I'd take the rest of the day off. Figured I deserved it. She didn't sit down. That was interesting. Normally, she'd flop onto the couch, scroll through her phone, act like nothing in the world was worth stressing over. But now she looked like someone who wasn't quite sure if she had walked into an argument or not. "So," she said, choosing her words carefully, "are we going to talk about what happened?" "Oh, absolutely," I said. "Just not right now." She blinked. "Not right now." "Nope." I leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. "I figure you need some time to think. Get your thoughts in order. Maybe come up with a few more stories about late meetings." Helen exhaled through her nose. "Jerry, don't," I said, shaking my head. "Not yet. We'll get to it." And that's when it happened. Her phone buzzed. Normally, I wouldn't have cared. Normally, she would have checked it without a second thought. But this time, she didn't. Instead, she glanced at it, just for a fraction of a second. And then she looked back at me. I smiled. "Go ahead. Answer it." She hesitated. And in that hesitation, I knew everything I needed to know. "Jerry, I don't." I laughed, standing up. "Helen, it's fine. Really, I want you to answer it." Her jaw tightened. "It's not. Because here's the thing." I continued, stepping past her, grabbing my keys off the counter. "I already know who it is. And if you have any sense at all, you'll pick up that phone, walk into another room, and start figuring out exactly how much this is all about to cost you." I left before she could say anything else. Tomorrow was going to be a great day. Helen had a unique talent, an ability to walk into any situation she had completely ruined and somehow act like she was the victim. It was honestly impressive. If life handed out awards for deflecting responsibility with an Oscar-worthy performance, she'd have a whole shelf of them. So when I walked back into the house the next morning, coffee in hand, fully expecting another round of tense silence or maybe some weak attempt at an excuse, I wasn't prepared for the scene that was waiting for me. Helen was sitting at the kitchen table, looking like she had just been cast as the lead in a tragic drama. The moment she saw me, she let out this shaky breath, like she had been waiting all night to unburden herself. "Jerry." Her voice was raw, eyes red-rimmed, hair messier than usual. I don't even know where to start." I sat down across from her, took a sip of my coffee, and gave her a look that said, "Wow me." She swallowed hard, clasping her hands together like she was about to deliver a monologue that would change the course of history. "I made a mistake." I nodded. "Sure did." Her lips trembled, and she sniffled. "I wasn't thinking clearly. Things have been complicated. And I just felt so lost, Jerry." I took another sip. "MHM." She blinked, clearly waiting for me to jump in with some kind of comfort. When I didn't, she pushed forward. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, voice cracking just enough to sound genuine. I was confused. I was struggling. And Alan, he was just there. Someone to talk to. I leaned back in my chair. "Fascinating. So your solution to struggling was to what? Hold hands with Alan at secret support group meetings for confused spouses?" She winced. "It wasn't like that." I tilted my head. "Really?" "Because according to Alan, it was exactly like that. Well, minus the part where he mistook himself for some kind of moral hero by telling me about it." Helen's breath hitched, and she rubbed her temples like she was seconds away from collapsing under the weight of her own bad decisions. "Jerry, please. Just listen to me." I said. "It's not my fault that what I'm hearing is terrible." She bit her lip, hands shaking slightly. "I know I messed up. But I love you. I swear I do." "Wow," I said, setting my coffee cup down. "What a relief." Here I was, thinking you only loved making questionable choices. She let out a small sob, timed just a little too perfectly. "Please, Jerry, don't do this. Don't shut me out like this." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the way you shut me out while sneaking around with Alan? That kind of shutting out?" Her face crumbled, and for a brief moment, I saw it. The flicker of realization that this wasn't going to be as easy as she thought. That whatever plan she had of making me crumble into pity and forgiveness was falling apart. Helen had spent years perfecting the art of manipulation. The soft voice, the watery eyes, the carefully placed pauses meant to pull at heartstrings. It had probably worked a dozen times before, on different people, in different situations. But not this time. She reached for my hand across the table. I didn't move. Jerry, she whispered, I need you. No, I said, my voice calm. You need someone who falls for this. And I'm fresh out of stupid. Her fingers trembled in the air before she pulled her hand back like I had just confirmed her worst fear. She let out a shaky breath. What do you want me to say? I shrugged. I don't know, Helen. How about something original? Maybe something that isn't a recycled speech from a bad soap opera. She clenched her jaw. I'm trying. Are you? I asked, tilting my head. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're trying to do damage control, not actually take responsibility. Tears welled up in her eyes again. That's not fair. I laughed, shaking my head. Not fair? Helen, let me explain something to you. Fair left the building the moment Alan decided to introduce himself at my front door like he was the main character in some twisted sitcom. Fair took a hike when you lied to my face about late meetings while Alan was probably still buttoning his shirt somewhere. She inhaled sharply, blinking away the tears, switching tactics. I can't lose you. Oh, I bet you thought that, I said. I bet you thought you could do whatever you wanted. And I'd just sit here, waiting for you to drop your grand explanation so I could be your little safety net. Helen let out a shaky breath. We can fix this. I chuckled, standing up. Helen, you're standing in a house that still has my name on the mortgage. I'm already fixing it. Her eyes widened slightly. What do you mean? I stretched, yawning slightly. Well, for starters, I made a few financial adjustments. Figured it was time to put some distance between our assets, just in case you had any more surprises lined up. Her face paled. You touched the accounts? Oh, not all of them, I said. Just the ones that mattered. And by mattered, I mean the ones that funded your little collection of expensive distractions. She shot up from her chair, panic creeping into her expression. Jerry, that's what happens when you treat your marriage like a disposable rental, I interrupted, walking past her. I'm just making sure I don't keep paying for something that's already fallen apart. She turned to follow me. You can't just cut me off like that. I stopped at the door, turning slightly. Oh, I absolutely can. But don't worry, Helen. I'm sure Alan has some amazing financial stability to fall back on. Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since this whole mess started, she looked like she actually understood what was happening. I wasn't bending. I wasn't playing the game. I wasn't giving her the easy way out. And suddenly, Helen didn't look like a woman in control of the situation anymore. Good. Helen wasn't crying anymore. That phase had passed. She had burned through the pity routine, the desperate clinging, and the heartfelt confessions that weren't heartfelt at all. Now, she was standing in the middle of the living room with her arms crossed, lips pressed together, trying to figure out how to spin the situation back in her favor. It was almost admirable, the sheer effort she put into avoiding accountability. Some people trained for marathons. Helen had spent years training for arguments, rehearsing excuses, perfecting the art of making every problem look like someone else's fault. Unfortunately for her, I wasn't playing my part anymore. You're being unreasonable, she finally said, her voice sharper now, less fragile. Am I? I asked, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. Because from where I'm standing, this is the most reasonable I've ever been. She scoffed, shaking her head. You're acting like I finished someone. Oh, don't be dramatic, I said. If you had finished someone, at least that would have taken effort. Helen let out a bitter laugh, like I was the one being ridiculous. So that's it. Just throw everything away. I raised an eyebrow. Helen, you threw everything away. I'm just the one taking out the trash. She let out a sharp breath and turned away for a second, as if composing herself, before spinning back around with a new approach. I can't believe you're doing this over a mistake. A mistake, I repeated. That's interesting. Because when Alan introduced himself to me on my front porch, he sure made it sound like an ongoing activity. You know, more of a hobby than a mistake. Her jaw clenched. You're twisting this. No, Helen, I said, pushing off the wall. I'm doing something you clearly struggle with, calling it what it is. Silence. For the first time, she looked a little less certain. Not sad. Not guilty. Just unsure. Like she had never actually planned for the scenario where I didn't fold. Then she sighed. Okay, fine. You're hurt, I get it. But we can work through this. I laughed. Oh, no, no, no. We're not doing that speech. Her head snapped up. What speech? I gestured vaguely. The one where you suddenly want to fix things, as if this is just a minor inconvenience and not, you know, a fundamental betrayal. She rolled her eyes, exhaling sharply. Oh, Jerry, be serious. I am serious, I said. Which is why you need to pack a bag. Helen blinked. Excuse me. You heard me. I pointed toward the stairs. Grab what you need and go. She laughed. A short, disbelieving sound. You're kicking me out. Well, you can stay if you want, I said. But I'd imagine it'd be very awkward for you to be here while I change the locks. She stared at me, searching my face for any sign that I was bluffing. She didn't find one. Where am I supposed to go? She asked, arms tightening around herself. I shrugged. Not my problem. Jerry. No, I interrupted. No more speeches, no more excuses, no more acting like I'm some cold-hearted monster for not wanting to live with someone who actively disrespected our marriage. She looked away, jaw tense. I sighed, rubbing my temple. Look, Helen, I don't care where you go. Go to a friend's house. Go to your sister's. Go see if Alan has a spare couch. Though, based on his decision-making skills, I wouldn't count on it. She flinched. I walked past her, grabbed a duffel bag from the hallway closet, and tossed it onto the couch. There. Pack. She hesitated, staring at the bag like it was some foreign object she had never seen before. You really mean it, she said quietly. Of course I do, I said. You made your choices, Helen. This is just one of the consequences. For a moment, just a moment, I thought she might argue again. But then she exhaled, shoulders sinking slightly, and without another word, she picked up the bag and headed upstairs. 15 minutes later, she was standing by the door, bag in hand, face carefully blank. You're making a mistake, she said. I smiled. I think we both know who made the biggest mistake here. She held my gaze for a long second. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out. I closed the door behind her. And just like that, I finally had my house back. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel